This month and next, we're looking at a few of the essentials of what we believe as United Methodists. And last week we looked at what United Methodists believe about grace and what John Wesley taught us about grace. And there's three forms of grace, and we learned those. They are prevenient grace, and justifying grace, and sanctifying grace. And we will periodically have a little pop quiz about that. We also learned that we can go into the hymnal and we can see those different types of grace explained to us in the hymns. But today we're going to consider three brief rules that Wesley taught to help Methodists live in faithfulness. It was important to Wesley to keep things simple. There's always going to be a lot of long-winded pastors who talk about Scripture in a very heady sense. Something that sounds intellectual, but maybe you don't walk away with really having something that you can apply to your life. And Wesley was very long-winded. Some of his sermons would be 2 or 3 hours. But he did try to keep things at least simple. So to help the early Methodists, Wesley developed these three general rules. And he taught that Christians should continually show evidence of their desire for salvation in these three ways. First, that doing no harm, doing good, and attending on the ordinances of God. Or today we say, staying in love with God. Now, these three rules are certainly not the whole story about what it means to be a follower of Christ. But it gives us a foothold to help us understand our Christian discipleship. So let's start with doing no harm. Who's in the medical field here? I know Jane is. The first rule of any physician is doing no harm. But even when something seems good, it could very well be doing harm to others or doing harm to ourselves. Now, one of the truths of the gospel of Jesus Christ is that God wants us all to experience the good life, a life lived in God's presence and committed to God's purposes. And one thing that John Wesley wants us to be aware of is that anything that steers us away from experiencing God's good life is actually doing harm. But it's not always so clear. So in the last year, I experienced what I thought was doing good for someone else. But I eventually realized that I was in fact doing harm. See, I have this house in Kiwani, and a friend was renting it. And last year he lost his job, and he wasn't able to pay his rent or utilities. And I was willing to help him out. I agreed to pay for his expenses. We'd been friends for a lot of years, and I said, oh, that's okay. I know you will pay me back when you get another job. And besides, with him living there, the yard was taken care of and the snow removal was taken care of, so that had value to him. But after several months, my friend found a new comfort zone in not paying rent. So my effort to do good for my friend actually ended up doing harm for him in the form of enabling him. Because I took on responsibilities that were his. And I actually guided him to live on the generosity of others. So here was the big message to me. When we do for others what they can and should be doing for themselves, we both remain stuck. This attempt to help my friend not only harmed my friend, but it harmed me too. Now, of course, helping doesn't always end up in enabling. I look at the support for flood victims and the people who are working on their own homes, they're working on their neighbors' homes. People are just being so generous, and as artists said, they're coming and raising money for all kinds of things. And that's a very different kind of helping. In my case, I enabled my friend, and I did harm to him. And I harmed myself as well. Paul wrote to Galatia and to the other churches that Christians should be good neighbors. And that means to be prepared to join in the fun when somebody has good news, but also to be there to support and grieve with those who face tragedy and challenge. There's more to it than sharing our lives in community. We have to stop speaking words that hurt others. We have to stop practices that allow for harm. Bullying happens in more places than just in schools. In our adult world, bullying is disguised with different kinds of labels. In fact, Paul says we should go out of our way to do wonderful and positive acts of kindness for people, even to those who have wronged us. So God brings people to accountability. God does that, to deal with the results of their own spiritual actions. We don't need to do that. When we play the role of judge, when we try to exact a human revenge on someone who has wronged us, or even someone who disagrees with us, we are causing harm. What we need to know today is that anything we do as Christians that causes harm to ourselves or to others, that keeps people, and yes, it keeps us too, from experiencing the fullness of God's grace. So when we can commit to doing no harm and take that first step of laying aside our desire to do harm, then we immediately discover how connected we are in God's unlimited love. When we're determined to do no harm to someone else, we put God in control. We lose our fear of each other, and we find that good and solid place where we can together seek faithfulness to God. So more than 200 years ago, Wesley said, "This is what I would expect of those who desire salvation. Firstly, that they do no harm." And then Wesley and the other Methodists resolved to live that way. I hope that we can do that also. Wesley's second rule challenges us even more. We can probably adopt a hands-off approach of doing no harm. After all, if I do nothing, I can't hurt someone, right? Not exactly. Because the second rule challenges us to take action, to do good. We seem to be drawn to want to do good for those who fit our category of being worthy somehow. People who are more like us. Remember what Paul wrote to Galatia, what we read today. We should go out of our way to do these wonderful positive acts of kindness to all people. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your enemies. And love the enemies of God. And you know that's really tough. How do we know what it is to do good? See, when I first read those rules several years ago, I thought that doing no harm and doing good were kind of opposite ends of the same idea. And, maybe sometimes it is, but not always. So let's take an example, and you'll learn that many of my examples use food. I love cookies. I love Girl Scout cookies. Thin Mints, those are great, but Caramel Delights, oh my. A shortbread cookie with caramel and chocolate and coconut, those were made just for me. They're also called Samoas, like I want Samora, okay? The sad part is that a box of Caramel Delights is really only one serving. I mean, yeah, it says 7 on the box, but once you open that box, there's no way to close it back. And they're in those little plastic containers, and you pull that out, and those first 5 cookies are just sitting right there, and they're gone. And you could stop there, but the next 5 are kind of like peeking out. And you've hit a good rhythm, so you don't want to really stop, So the next 5 slide out, and then they're gone. And they're so good, that crisp cookie and that crunchy, gooey caramel. Really good. And then the last part of the box, well, you can't leave those poor, innocent cookies laying there. And besides, at this point, you have to destroy all the evidence, right? So they're gone. And the awful thing about sugar, and especially cookies like this, is that it stimulates you to want more and more. But you get less and less enjoyment out of each one. And by the time you reach the end of that box, you're not full. In fact, your stomach probably hurts. Something that started out as being something so good it ended up doing harm. Your whole good-bad meter finally kicks in and you realize, I shouldn't have done that, and then you start feeling guilty. It was really quite harmful and bad. And yeah, that's kind of a silly example. Deep down, we know the difference between bad and good, right? We know when we're doing something good, and we know when we're doing something bad. I mean, sometimes it takes us a while to figure it out, but eventually we see with the wisdom of the eyes of the Spirit. In that letter to Gaius, the author of 3 John says, don't imitate evil, but do what is good. Simple and straightforward, just like John Wesley. And finally, we are guided to attend on the ordinances of God. And we don't really use that word ordinances much. I mean, maybe Tom or Tim does. And working in government, you would. Wesley meant ordinances as the practices that keep us in relationship with God and that keep humans alive and vital and growing. And that's why staying in love with God is such great language for us. It provides a moral compass for us. Our wisdom, our courage, our strength to live faithfully, that allows us to find that they all come from the one who authored us and sustains us. God who calls us and sends us, feed my lambs, tend my sheep. And yeah, there are times that staying in love with God is a lot easier than other times. When things are going well and we feel so blessed by God, but you know, when things are not going well, when the floodwaters come, when someone we know and love is sick or injured, when we lose a job or a relationship ends, when someone we love reaches the end, when there's a big change, when you know those things happen, gosh, you know I would get mad at God. It's not fair. What did I do to deserve all this pain? Things were going really well. Sorry. God, you better get down here right now and fix my life. And God said, child, there is so much more to your life than this day. Beyond the horizon of this day, I have so much more planned for your life. Tell me what's coming, God. I really want to know. I will tell you in time, my child. Those are really hard conversations to have with God. Staying in love with God means that we trust the bigger picture. And there is a larger picture ahead for us and for this church. And I'm not sure what God has in mind for us. But for our part, as we journey together, we can anchor ourselves in these 3 simple rules of doing no harm and doing good and loving and trusting that greater picture of our life in God. For in these words, this is where our Christian discipleship begins. Amen. I invite our ushers to receive our